Building a gravel parking pad or driveway is really not that complicated, in theory. In practice, there are a few factors that you'll have to sort out, and so I'm going to show you what I did, and hopefully that'll help you in your decision-making process. Now, if you're in North America and you live in one of these three regions, your soil composition is probably somewhat similar, and it probably looks something like this. The bottom two layers, dirt and clay in whatever percentage you have them, those will pack down nice and tight so that we can drive on them. The top two layers, that's the soft stuff and the vegetation, and we want to scrape that off and replace it with fabric and gravel. Now, I'm not qualified to talk about things like soil porosity, freeze and thaw cycles, or how clay swells differently in different parts of the world. Your ground may look like this, it may also look like this. Either way, you're probably safe to scrape all that stuff off the top and start on a base of clay. After all, this is a gravel driveway, it's not concrete. I'm based in the northeast part of the United States. What I'm doing obviously works here, but, disclaimer. The area where I'm putting my parking pad is next to my driveway, which is on a slope, which means I'll have to remove a lot of dirt, which means I had to call 811 here in Pennsylvania for them to mark my utility lines before I start to dig. I started marking off the edges of my parking pad right behind where those utility lines are marked, and I measured 10 feet from the edge of my driveway because the trailer I want to park here is 8 feet wide. I need a little room to maneuver, plus I want to be able to put a retaining wall here someday. I rented a stand-on skid steer from a local equipment company. Typically you can get these for between $300 and $400 for a weekend. And this machine was really ideal for this type of work because it's extremely maneuverable. It's basically a zero turn, which means you can pivot in tight spaces. It's also really good at digging, and not every machine that has a bucket on the front is, but this thing is heavy and you need weight for downforce. You also need good breakout force, which this also has. So while there are many types of machines that you can rent, I definitely recommend the stand-on skid steer for smaller projects like parking pads. I also recommend getting a retired dad. I know you can't just rent one of those, but if you happen to have one, they seem to like running machinery, and they typically work for free. If you're not familiar with machines like this, I should also mention that these run on diesel fuel, which means you'll need to refuel them from the yellow can, that's for diesel, the red can is for gas. And there is a little bit of a learning curve, but by the end of that second day, we were moving pretty freely. I'm also seeing a lot of the Chinese mini skid steers around, and sometimes you can even rent one of those on Marketplace. But if you only have one weekend to knock out a job like this, I would probably stay away from those. If you want to buy one, well, that's, a different conversation, a different video. You can see I also rented a dump trailer from Home Depot. I think this cost me about $150 for 12 hours. You definitely need to figure out what you're going to do with all your excess dirt if you're digging. When you dig dirt out of the ground, it takes up a lot more space than when it's in the ground and it's compact. I hauled about 9 loads of dirt using this dump trailer over the course of a day. Fortunately, it's a power dump, so I didn't have to shovel anything out. Except, oh wait, I did, because the first one didn't work, and I had to shovel that one out by hand. So maybe test it in the parking lot and make sure it goes up all the way before you start filling it with dirt. Also, I have a property to dump all this stuff on, and that saved me a lot of money versus hiring an excavator to haul it away, so maybe check Marketplace or something like that to see if anyone in your area is looking for clean fill before hiring somebody with a dump truck. The skid steer leaves everything pretty rough because it basically just rips the dirt out of the ground. So I cleaned up the edges by hand using a spade for the topsoil part, and then a mattock or a pick, whatever you want to call it, for the clay. Digging clay really sucks, so whatever you can do to avoid that, I highly recommend it. Maybe you can hire a younger person. Now, if you can rent a mini excavator for this kind of finish work, that will not only save your back, but it will also give you cleaner edges. And while we're moving dirt, just a quick note about drainage, which probably is not a problem for most people building on flat ground. If you're building on the same axis as the hill, in other words, up or down the hill, kind of like I am with my original parking pad, you may want to consider digging some diagonal trenches to kind of channel the water out of your driveway and avoid washing things out. Before spreading gravel, it's a good idea to put down some driveway fabric. And this is basically the same as lawn fabric, except this is the type with woven plastic strands. And it's going to create a semi-permeable barrier to prevent your gravel from sinking into the dirt. And it comes in different widths and lengths, so you just make sure that it's wide enough and long enough to cover your parking pad or your driveway, and you can also layer this if needed. The gravel I used is 2A limestone, which means that the rocks will be up to 2 inches in length and width. And there's also a dust involved, a very fine powder, which is going to pack down really solid in and underneath your larger pieces of gravel. You can see I can barely shovel it here once it's packed down, and that's going to create a nice solid base. In North America, gravel is typically ordered by the yard or by the ton. A yard means a cubic yard, and then a ton obviously is a measure of weight, but they're not the same. A yard is about 1.5 times a ton, which means a yard is more than a ton. And of course that varies by material, but if you're comparing pricing, just remember yard equals more than ton. We had to cover about 350 square feet, so I ordered 4 yards of gravel. My wife spread most of it, which she still reminds me about from time to time. Most landscaping supply companies will only deliver if you're ordering a minimum of 3 yards or 3 tons. And of course there are alternatives to gravel, which I'll cover in a different video. Once the gravel has been spread, you'll want to go over it with a tamper or a plate compactor to pack it down nice and tight. And then I sprayed mine down with some water just to make sure those finer particles settled toward the bottom. So because most landscape suppliers only deliver if you order a minimum of 3 yards, it can be tempting to go for gravel in a bag for smaller areas. But I can tell you that unless you're covering an area less than 10 square feet, it's probably going to be more expensive in the long run. For example, after I finished my parking pad, I decided a few months later that I wanted to extend it by about 25 square feet. The problem is, one bag of gravel really only covers about 1 square foot at a depth of 4 inches. And if a bag of gravel costs roughly $5 a bag, then I would have had to pay between $100 and $125 to cover that 25 square feet. I realize that not everyone has the ability to go and pick up landscape supply gravel, and I'm certainly not volunteering that friend or family member who has a truck or a trailer, because in my circles, I am that guy. But if it helps, many landscape suppliers will also sell gravel by the half yard, and some will even sell it by 5-gallon bucket, which is still more cost effective than buying it by the bag, but only if you have a lot of buckets. Before I started this project, I got quotes from 2 local excavators to do all the work you've just seen here. The first one quoted me $2,500, the second quoted $4,000, and while they both would have been faster, they would have had triaxle trucks and multiple machines. In the long run, I think it was worth it for the money that I saved. Here's my final cost breakdown, and of course I'm probably forgetting a few odds and ends here, but the bottom line is I saved more than half of the lowest bid for this job, and almost 3 times as much as I would have paid for the highest bid. And yeah, it took me, my dad, and also my wife several weeks to do this, where it might have taken just a few days for a professional excavator. Man, I have no regrets on this project. So this is the time when I admit some things that didn't go exactly as planned. For example, you'll see there's some discoloration in this area right over here, and that's because I did this part second. I did this part first, and then a couple weeks later came back and extended it a little bit, and even though I went back to the same supplier, got the same type of gravel, it's a slightly different color. So if you want to make sure everything matches perfectly, you've got to get it all at the same time. The next thing is the weeds, and you see there's no weeds here right now. That's because I pulled them all. They will grow in any environment, regardless of whether there's water, and they'll put their roots right into the gravel. So I spray it and I pull the weeds and they just come back. So if you've got a good solution for that, I'm all ears. I probably could have compacted this a little bit better. I tamped everything down by hand, and then I drove over it a bunch of times with my truck to pack everything down the best I could. But I could have rented a plate compactor and really made sure this was nice and tight, so when I back my truck over it, which is rear wheel drive, it doesn't peel out all the time. Another thing I did that's a little bit different with this project is I made kind of this little elevated section right here. You could call it a hump, and that's because when I park my trailer here, the jack kind of comes to rest right here, and that helps level the trailer out a little bit. This section here worked out pretty well. I was able to maintain a level that's flush with the concrete until you get up to about here, and this is about 3/4 of the way up into the parking pad, and here it just kind of angles back into the hill a little bit to level things out. And when I park a trailer on it, help make the trailer more level. Something I was pretty happy about is I added this little drainage section here so that the water coming from the main part of the driveway and filtering down, straight down the driveway would kind of turn and run off into my yard as opposed to over toward the concrete, and it actually works. The first time we had a significant rain, I came and I checked out here and it was actually damp. So that means at least some of the water is being channeled over here into my yard. So the biggest thing that did not go according to plan is I actually finished this project over 2 years ago. And the reason why it's taken me so long to post this video is during that time, my dad and I have both been dealing with some pretty serious illnesses. His is more serious than mine, but they're both chronic and they both just changed a lot of plans. I had to take a long break from YouTube. Wasn't sure if, I'd be coming back to it, but I'm finally starting to get around to, some of the projects that I had put on hold. You can see there's a retaining wall here. I actually finished that project and posted that video long before I could get to finishing this video for this project. You can see, 2 years later, it's still holding up pretty strong. I'm going to continue doing projects as often as I can. I have a blog where I talk a little bit more about what's going on, and I'll put a link to that in the description if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you for building with me, and I'll see you on the next project.
So who does your excavation work?
I got this retired guy. He works really cheap, but man, he's not very good.
But I'll bet you he's a class act.
He's the nicest guy I know. Send it.